Hi, I'm Katrina Johnson from New Sky Consulting, and you're watching the CATS channel, supporting young people with disabilities to live their best and brightest lives. And today I want to delve a little bit further into the NDIS with you. Now, in a previous blog, I already covered a little bit about the NDIS, but today I wanted to talk about the NDIS in terms of how different are things really going to be. So before I do, I just want to recap on some of those really grounding principles and philosophies of the NDIS, and there are two. The first one is the NDIS aims to give people with disabilities greater choice and control over the course of their lives. The other guiding principle and foundations of the NDIS is working under the principle of person-centred practices, which is primarily about putting the person with the disability at the very centre of all funding processes and all funding decisions. So when I first started to learn about the NDIS, one of the big questions I had, and I had many questions, and I still do, but one of the first questions I had and kept asking myself was, is this really going to look or be any different to what we already have now? Because on the surface, those principles are not new principles. The notion of person-centred practices has been around for a very long time, and many services, like the service at CATS, have already been working using those guiding principles. The principle of choice and control are also not new, and I know that at CATS we work very closely with the young people, very diligently and very consciously on building young people with disabilities options and understanding and using choice and having control over their lives. So they're really not new principles. So how different and how new can the NDIS really be? But I'm learning that as the NDIS unfolds, the differences can be seen. It is a monumental shift. It's taking those principles and it's making them a sector-wide and a nationwide values and philosophies and principles in funding people with disabilities. And it's saying to all that these principles are not just for those that are principled. It is a way, and it is going to be the way throughout Australia. So in looking at that, what are the changes? And today I'm going to talk to you more about the 4 areas in which I think you will see significant or somewhat significant changes in the way that people receive funded supports in Australia. The first change I want to talk about is where you go to get your funding. Now, the NDIA becomes your go-to for funding, to access funding, to determine eligibility for funding, and to be allocated funding. Not the state government and not service providers. Primarily, we've been very much used to funding being administered and allocated by the state government. So for us in Queensland, it's through the Department of Communities and Disability Services. But that state government under NDIS will no longer have that role. The NDIA becomes the statutory agency that implements and delivers the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The second change is the process to receive funding or a funding allocation is different. At the moment, families and people with disabilities receive funding support through the government, and we are used to a process of intake, of assessment, registration of need, having people coming out and linking supports and things like that. So we're used to that kind of process. The process under the National Disability Insurance Scheme is not too dissimilar, but the tools that they use in each of the steps are different. So in general, the steps are access, eligibility. So that's about determining whether you are eligible or not to receive supports under the scheme. And this includes an available self-assessment where you can self-assess whether you are eligible, and that's provided by a little tool on the NDIS site. But once you've determined your own eligibility, you then need to fill out an application. Eligibility doesn't have to also be determined on site. You can also contact the NDIA directly. The second step in the process is the assessment and planning of support needs. Now, this involves meeting with staff of the NDIA and going through a range of interview processes. When I say range, it may be just one meeting, but it's more than likely it will take more than one meeting. And it involves meeting with a planner and talking through the goals, the aspirations, and the needs of the person with the disability. It's at this meeting that you would want to have done a little bit of pre-planning before going to, in thinking about your goals, your aspirations, and your needs for support. The next step in the process is allocation of funding. So once they've identified your support needs, they've had a talk about your goals and aspirations, they've gone through their own assessment tools, the NDIA will then determine the amount of supports that it will fund, the specific types of supports that it will fund, and then determine what it will actually pay for in your supports under the scheme. After you've looked at your supports and that all of that's been done, it's then about choosing a funds management model. Now, this is a little bit different to what we're used to. So what it's saying is that in the framework of choice and control, the NDIS is really keen to give people with disabilities as much control over their funding that they can manage for themselves. So they will offer people a range of options to choose from in terms of how your funds are managed. I'm going to be talking about this in greater depth later on in future blogs as well. So stay tuned for more on that then. The next step is your choice of service provider. So once you've had the allocation of funding and the service types are identified, it's then over to you and the person with the disability to choose the service that you would like to deliver the services based on your plan. So to really implement the goals and aspirations and the supports needed to make your plan and put your plan into action. And that's where the magic begins. The third big difference that I can talk to you about with regard to the NDIS is the kinds of supports that are funded and how they will be funded. So let's remember that the NDIS is really grounded in those philosophies of person-centred practices. So that's where the person with a disability is at the very centre of the process and is at the very core of all the funding decisions, including the types of supports that people will be funded for. Now, we know and we understand, and from what I've read, the NDIS also knows that parents and carers are absolutely critical in the life of a person with a disability. And the NDIA will want to make sure that they're part of the process and that they participate and they're involved in the planning meetings, because the information that they have, the understanding, the knowledge, and in the provision of care, they are the people that have to give and need to give information and to help drive the plan. However, it's also worth really understanding that the NDIA will make decisions about funding and the service types that they will fund. That's going to be based on the needs of the goals of the person with a disability, not on the goals of the needs of the parent or carer. Now, this is a bit of a change for some people and maybe a bit of a shift in mindset for many, because it's not going to be talking about the kinds of supports carers need to support them in their caring role. They're going to be talking to you about what are the supports the person with a disability needs to further advance and progress their goals and aspirations in life. Now, this is important. Supports are funded on the basis of what they're calling reasonable and necessary. You're going to hear a lot about reasonable and necessary. You're going to hear the term a lot. You're going to be told that, it a lot. So understanding reasonable and necessary is going to be important. So what does that mean? So when they're talking reasonable and necessary, they're talking about funding those things that are directly linked to the individual's plan, that are based on their identified goals and aspirations, but they also are based on the operational guidelines of the NDIS Act. So that Act is also important in understanding what will be funded. The other thing that's important is it takes into account the role of informal supports in the life of a person with a disability. And what it says is it's not there to duplicate the role and the natural role that informal supports have in the life of a person with a disability. It's not also there, they don't want to, and they're not there to duplicate the other formal supports that may be necessary in a person's life that can be met through other agencies. So things like the health and education aspects. So it's not going to duplicate supports or fund supports that are available through other options to a person with a disability. So understanding informal supports and their role, and understanding the role of other agencies and supports is also important. The types of supports that will be funded come under the general broad headings of education, moving towards employment, social participation, independence within the community, living arrangements, and health and well-being. And those supports are funded to help participants of the NDIS to pursue their goals and objectives and aspirations, to increase, of course, their independence, and to also increase their social and economic participation in their community, and also to develop their capacity to actively participate and take part in their community. It's also important and good to know that funding will also be available for things like equipment, for things like transport, and also modifications. But those things will only be funded if they are deemed reasonable and necessary and are in the pursuit of the goals, the independence, the social participation and the economic participation, and building the capacity of a person to participate in community. And they will also only be provided if they're directly attributed to the disability itself. It's good to get an idea of what things you may need in relation to those and why you need those supports. The last area I want to talk to you about, where there's quite differences in the way things are done now, is how funds are managed. So under the NDIS, participants get to choose a funds management model that best suits them. And the aim of this is to increase participants' choice and control over their supports and their funds as much and wherever possible. So there's a range of options that people can choose from in regard to who looks after the money, who administers the money, how are those support services paid, when they're paid, selecting those services, setting up the arrangements with those services. There's a choice, there's a continuum of options available to people around those. And these options go from the person with a disability having full responsibility and control and management of the money, and also the plan and the implementation of the plan, to leaving those responsibilities up to the NDIA itself. Just know that no matter what option you choose when it comes to how funds are managed, that you stay in control and you get to choose who provides the direct services to you. When considering the type of funds management model you want to choose, there's a lot to take into consideration, from the level of responsibility that you'd like to have for those funds. It's taxpayers' funds, and there will be quite stringent reporting requirements and regulations and rules around that. It's also important to consider things such as the work level that's involved in doing it and the degree of complexity that may or may not be involved, and whether those things are something you want to or are able to take on. But don't worry, because the NDIA is going to talk to you about those different options first and give you a lot of information about what's available. And it's a continuum from full responsibility and control to leaving it to the NDIA. There's a mix in the middle there. What would be good for you to do or to know before you go to such a meeting is what those options are and which one you might be interested in and what questions you have about those things. So in future blogs, I've got some more information coming up about self-direction and the options, and we'll be talking to a self-direction guru of Queensland. So as you can tell, there are some significant differences and changes in the way things are done under NDIS compared to the way things are done now, particularly when it comes to the processes, the kinds of supports and how funds are managed. And there's also some things that are very much the same when you're talking about key values and principles and philosophies. A lot of services in the sector are already working under those principles. So next week I'll be giving you 3 things that you can do right now to start to get NDIS ready. But in the meantime, I'd really like to hear from you. I'd really like to know in the comments section below, I'd like to know what do you think are going to be the biggest differences between now and under the NDIS? And what do you hope the biggest differences are going to be? So I look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and you'll get updates on any of the blogs that come through. You'll also get some information on any of the activities our young people at CATS are doing and get to see what we're doing. The other thing is if you want to know more about the NDIS right now, we've got a free ebook available to you. If you follow the links below, you'll be able to download that ebook and have that sent directly to you and available to you straight away. So please go ahead and do that. It's a free ebook and it's hopefully a bit of a user-friendly guide to outline what things look like. Let's just remember that we're still in pilot phase, so things aren't crystal clear or concrete. So it's just an understanding of how things are unrolling. So thank you very much for watching yet again, and have a great week. And remember, we all deserve to live our best and brightest life. Bye for now.